"Daddy, did we do something wrong?"
Let's go.
The little girl's voice cracked as her father pulled her gently away from the door. A man in a gray jacket standing near the wall heard every word of it, and something in his chest went cold. He had built this restaurant so no child would ever have to ask that question, and tonight, at his own front door, one just had. To understand how he got to that moment, you have to go back to 20 minutes earlier, before the humiliation, before the silence that fell over the room, back to a Friday night that started out looking like any other. Maddox's table sat on the corner of Fifth and Larkin, glowing warm against the evening dark. Through the windows, candlelight flickered over white tablecloths. Laughter spilled from the patio. A line had already formed outside, guests checking their phones, couples leaning close, families waiting for their names to be called. Inside, the kitchen moved like a well-rehearsed dance. Pans hissed, orders were called out and confirmed in quick, practiced rhythm. Servers wove between tables carrying plates of seared salmon and roasted vegetables, the air thick with the smell of garlic and fresh bread. A busy Friday night at Maddox's table looked, from every angle, like exactly what it was supposed to be, a small business that had somehow become one of the most beloved restaurants in the city. To anyone passing by, it looked like a restaurant having the best night of its week. Nobody noticed the man standing quietly near the edge of the sidewalk. 44 years old, dressed in a plain gray jacket and scuffed work boots, hands tucked into his pockets. He hadn't planned on coming tonight. Something had pulled him here, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Call it instinct. Call it the quiet, nagging sense that something at his own restaurant had started to slip. He told himself he was just stopping. He didn't yet know how right that instinct would turn out to be. Marcus stepped toward the entrance and reached the host stand. A young man in a crisp black shirt looked up from his tablet. His name tag read Trevor. Trevor's eyes moved over Marcus quickly. The worn jacket, the scuffed boots, the absence of anything that said this man belonged here. "Do you have a reservation?" Trevor asked, already reaching for the tablet like the answer barely mattered. "No," Marcus said. "Just one, if that's all right." Trevor's smile flattened at the edges. "We're completely booked." Marcus glanced past him. 2 tables sat empty by the window, fully set, candles lit, waiting for no one. "What about those?" he asked. "Reserved," Trevor said, not even looking over his shoulder to check. Marcus nodded slowly. "All right, I can wait." "It'll be a while," Trevor said, already turning his attention elsewhere. "A long while." Marcus stepped to the side, near the wall, out of the way of the door traffic, and he did something Trevor didn't expect. He waited. 5 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside. 3 men stepped out in tailored jackets, watches catching the streetlight, laughing about something none of them bothered to explain to each other. Trevor's whole posture changed the moment he saw them. "Gentlemen," he said, already grabbing 3 menus before they'd even reached the door. "Right this way." He walked them straight past the line, straight past Marcus, and seated them at one of the tables he had just called reserved. One of the men glanced back toward the entrance as they were seated, noticing the line still forming outside, and laughed to his friends. "Guess it pays to look the part," he said, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. Marcus watched in silence. Interesting, he thought. Very interesting. A few minutes after that, an older woman approached the host stand, leaning on a cane, her coat buttoned slightly crooked against the cold. "Excuse me," she said softly, "is there any room at all tonight?" Trevor didn't look up from his phone. "It's a wait," he said flatly. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "I understand." She turned to leave, disappointment settling into the slope of her shoulders as she shuffled back toward the sidewalk. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. Not yet, he told himself. He needed to see how far this went. A delivery driver came to the door a moment later, holding a bag with an order number for a table inside. Trevor waved him off without a single word, like the man wasn't even standing there. The driver hesitated. "I just need someone to sign for this," he said. "Leave it by the door," Trevor said, not even glancing up. "Someone will grab it eventually." The driver frowned, but set the bag down and walked off into the night, shaking his head. A young couple came next, dressed simply, holding hands. They asked politely about a table for two. Trevor told them the wait was closer to 90 minutes now, though the number seemed to shift depending on who was asking. The couple exchanged a glance and quietly left to find somewhere else to eat. Marcus noticed something else, too. A teenage boy in a school uniform, likely on his way home from a shift somewhere, poked his head in to ask about picking up a to-go order for his family. Trevor told him to wait outside, in the cold, rather than let him stand just inside the door for the 2 minutes it would take. Each moment on its own was small, a shrug, a flat no, a distracted wave of the hand. Breathes in. Together, they were something else entirely, a pattern, a quiet, practiced rhythm of who mattered and who didn't, playing out again and again at the one door Marcus had built with his own hands. From behind the host stand, a server named Priya had been watching the whole thing unfold. She had worked at Maddox's table for 6 years. She had trained under the very people who built this place from nothing, and she knew exactly who was standing against that wall in the gray jacket. She slipped over to him, keeping her voice low. "Marcus," she whispered, "do you want me to say something?" "Not yet," he said, eyes still fixed on the door. "He's about to do it again," she whispered, glancing back toward Trevor. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I need to see how far it goes." Priya nodded, but her hands were trembling slightly as she walked away. She understood something the rest of the staff didn't. This wasn't just an owner quietly observing his restaurant on a Friday night. This was Angela's restaurant, and Angela would never have allowed a single moment of what she had just watched happen at that door. Priya remembered her very first shift here 6 years earlier. She had been 19, nervous, fumbling with a tray of water glasses, certain she was about to be fired before her first hour was even over. It had been Angela, not Marcus, who had knelt beside her, helped her gather the pieces, and told her something Priya had never forgotten. "Everyone who walks through that door is somebody's whole world to someone," Angela had said. "Treat them that way and you'll never go wrong here." Angela had passed less than a year later, but Priya had carried that sentence with her through every shift since, through every difficult table, every long night, every moment she'd wanted to quit. Quiet breath. Watching Trevor turn people away at the door tonight felt like watching someone spit on a grave. Soft exhale. Marcus stepped a little further into the entryway, close enough now to hear Trevor talking to another host near the kiosk, his voice carrying more than he probably realized.
"Look, I'm just saying," Trevor was saying, "we want a certain vibe in here on Fridays. You let in the wrong crowd, it changes the whole energy of the room. That guy by the wall, he kind of looks like someone who wandered in off the street. We don't need that tonight." The other host laughed under her breath. "So what, do you just quietly stall people out?" "Exactly," Trevor said, shrugging like it was obvious. "Keep the room feeling right. Owner's not even here to know the difference." Marcus felt something settle cold in his chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a busy night with a distracted host. This was a philosophy, a quiet, deliberate system for deciding who deserved a seat and who didn't. And it was the exact opposite of everything his wife had built this place to be. His mind slipped back, just for a moment, to a hospital room 8 years earlier. Angela's hand in his, weaker than it had ever been. "Promise me something," she had whispered. "When you build it, and you will, nobody walks through that door and feels like they don't belong. Not ever. Not for any reason." He had made that promise, not knowing how he would ever keep it. Back then, there was no restaurant. There was barely a plan, just the folding table at a farmer's market on weekends, selling grilled sandwiches while Caleb, 4 years old at the time, sat nearby, coloring on the back of a paper menu. For years, Marcus worked double shifts at a warehouse just to keep the lights on, saving whatever he could toward a dream that felt further away with every passing month. There were nights he sat at the kitchen table long after Caleb had gone to sleep, staring at numbers that never quite added up, wondering if he was chasing something impossible. But slowly, the folding table became a small stand. The stand became a tiny storefront with 4 tables and a hand-painted sign. And eventually, against every reasonable expectation, that storefront became Maddox's table, and then 2 more locations after that. He had built Maddox's table from nothing into 3 locations across the city, carrying that single sentence with him through every hard year that followed. He had hung no photo of himself on the walls, no name plaque, no story about the owner printed on the menu. He wanted the restaurant to be about the promise, not about him. Standing here now, watching a stranger decide who was worthy of kindness, Marcus understood something painful. Somewhere along the way, the promise had gotten lost, and it was his fault for not watching closely enough. He thought about how easy it had become over the years to trust the numbers on a spreadsheet instead of standing at the door himself. 3 locations meant 3 sets of managers, 3 sets of hosts, dozens of new hires he had never personally trained the way Angela once trained every single person who worked the floor. Somewhere in that growth, in all that success, the thing that mattered most had quietly slipped through the cracks without anyone noticing, including him. That realization sat heavier on him than anything Trevor had said or done so far, because a business could always hire new staff, but a broken promise, left unchecked long enough, could hollow out everything a place like this was ever meant to be. The door opened again. A man in a worn work coat stepped inside, holding the hand of a little girl in a slightly too big Sunday dress, clearly her very best outfit. "Table for 2, please," the father said, a hint of nervous hope threading through his voice. "It's her birthday. We saved up for tonight." Trevor barely glanced at them. "Sorry," he said. "We're not really equipped for walk-ins tonight. Might want to try somewhere else." The little girl looked up at her father, her small hand tightening around his. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" The father's face fell as he gently guided her back toward the door, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "Let's find somewhere else." Marcus felt the words hit him like a closed fist. Did we do something wrong? He remembered a night, years ago, standing outside a different restaurant with a much younger Caleb, unable to afford what was on the menu, telling his son the same gentle lie, "We'll find somewhere better," all while quietly dying inside at the sound of his own son's disappointment. He would not let another child feel that, not tonight, not at his own door, not under Angela's name.
Marcus stepped forward. "Wait," he said. The father turned, surprised to see the man in the gray jacket suddenly beside them. Marcus looked at Trevor. "Seat them." Trevor's expression hardened into something close to amused. "Sir, I already told you we're full. Those tables by the window have been empty for 20 minutes, Marcus said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Seat them." Trevor stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was doing Marcus some kind of favor. "Look, I don't know what this is, but I don't answer to you. Maybe it's time you head out." The restaurant seemed to quiet, just slightly. A few nearby guests glanced over, sensing something shifting in the air. Marcus reached into his jacket and placed something small on the host stand. A brass key, worn smooth with age, engraved faintly across its head, barely legible after years of use, 2 letters and a date. Trevor looked down at it, confused. What is this supposed to... Priya's voice cut through the quiet, trembling slightly. "That's the original key," she said, "from the very first location, the one that Angela and Marcus opened together." Trevor's face went pale. "You're—" He started but couldn't finish the sentence. "Marcus Reed," Marcus said quietly. "Owner." The word moved through the room like a current through water. Owner, owner, owner. Somewhere behind the kitchen line, a plate stopped clattering mid-motion. Conversations at nearby tables died off in the middle of sentences. Every staff member within earshot turned to look, one by one, until the whole front of the restaurant had gone still. Trevor's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind him, the young hostess who had laughed earlier about quietly stalling people out looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. A busser froze mid-step, a tray of dishes balanced in his hands, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Even the three men in tailored jackets, seated comfortably at the window table, had gone quiet, sensing that something significant was happening at the door they'd walked through so easily. The elderly woman who had been turned away earlier had not gone far. She was still visible through the window, standing at the bus stop across the street, and something made her pause and look back toward the restaurant, as if she could feel the shift in the air even from that distance. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Somehow that made it worse. "My wife built this restaurant," he said, loud enough now for the room to hear, so that nobody would ever have to feel what that little girl just felt standing at our door. Tonight, at the door of the restaurant that carries her promise in every single table we set, a father and his daughter were turned away on her birthday. An elderly woman was dismissed like she was invisible, and three men in expensive jackets were treated like royalty for no reason other than how they looked walking in. He looked directly at Trevor. "You didn't misread a busy night. You decided who deserved kindness. That was never your decision to make." Trevor's voice finally came out, small and unsteady. "I thought I was protecting the restaurant." "You were protecting an image," Marcus said. "Angela never cared about image. She cared about people. That was the entire point of this place." Trevor swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to the brass key still sitting on the counter between them. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I swear I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, not unkindly, but without softening the truth either. "It shouldn't have mattered whether I knew who I was. It should have mattered that a father and his daughter were standing at that door on her birthday. It should have mattered that an elderly woman needed somewhere warm to sit. None of that was ever supposed to depend on who might be watching." Trevor said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Marcus turned away from Trevor and walked straight to the father and daughter who were still frozen near the door, unsure whether to stay or go. He knelt down to the little girl's level, meeting her eyes. "Happy birthday," he said gently. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It won't happen again. Not tonight, and not ever." He looked up at her father. "Please, let me make this right." Marcus personally walked them to the best table in the house, the one by the window that had sat conspicuously empty all evening, and pulled out the little girl's chair himself. "Order anything you want," he told her. "Whatever you want tonight, it's yours." Her eyes went wide. "Anything?" she asked. "Anything," Marcus said, and for the first time all night he smiled. Her father's eyes filled with tears he was clearly fighting to hold back. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do this." "Actually," Marcus said, "I did." He stood and turned back toward his staff, toward Trevor, toward every employee now watching him in silence from across the room. "Tonight wasn't a bad night because we were busy. It was a bad night because we forgot who we built this place for." He let the words sit in the quiet for a moment. "My wife used to say a restaurant isn't measured by how full the tables are. It's measured by who feels welcome enough to sit at them." He looked once more toward the little girl, now laughing quietly with her father over the menu, and felt something in his chest ease just slightly. Angela's promise was still alive. It had simply needed someone to remember it out loud. As for Trevor, he wasn't fired on the spot, and he wasn't publicly shamed in front of the room. Marcus simply asked him to stay behind after close. What was said between them in that quiet conversation, only the two of them would ever know. But the next morning, every single employee at Maddox's table found a short handwritten note taped to the time clock. It read, "Nobody walks through this door and feels like they don't belong. Not ever. Not for any reason." That was her promise. Now it's ours. Signed simply, Marcus. Priya read the note twice before heading to the floor that morning. She thought about the little girl's voice from the night before, the question that had cut through the noise of a busy restaurant and landed somewhere much deeper. Did we do something wrong? No, she thought. They hadn't done anything wrong at all. Someone else had. And for one night, at one door, that mistake had finally been set right. Weeks later, the father and daughter returned to Maddox's table, this time with no hesitation at the door. Priya recognized them instantly and greeted them by name, walking them to the same window table where they'd sat on that birthday night. The little girl, a bit taller now, tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed toward the host stand. "Daddy, look," she said, "it's the note guy." Marcus happened to be near the entrance that evening, going over inventory with a manager, and he turned at the sound of her voice. He smiled and walked over, kneeling down to her level once again. "How was the rest of your birthday?" he asked. "It was the best one ever," she said proudly, "and this time nobody said we couldn't come in." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen, the same way it had the night he first knelt beside her. "That's exactly how it should be," he said softly, "every single time." Her father reached out and shook Marcus's hand. "We almost didn't come back," he admitted. "After that night, we figured maybe this just wasn't a place for people like us." Marcus held his gaze. "It's the only kind of place this was ever meant to be," he said. "I'm just sorry it took so long for that to be true again." As for Trevor, he stayed on at Maddox's table, though not at the front door. Marcus moved him to a role further from the entrance, one where he could learn, under close supervision, what the restaurant actually stood for before he was ever trusted with deciding who walked through that door again. It wasn't a punishment exactly, it was a chance, the same kind of chance Angela had always believed people deserved, even when they'd gotten something badly wrong. Some nights, Marcus still stood quietly near that same wall by the entrance, watching the door the way he had on that Friday night. Not out of suspicion anymore, but out of habit, and maybe out of love for what the place had become again. Because somewhere out there, on any given evening, there was always another family walking up to that door for the first time, unsure if they belonged. A tired mother after a long shift, an old man eating alone for the first time since losing his wife, a teenager saving up tip money just to treat his little sister to something nice, each one arriving with the same quiet, unspoken question that little girl had asked out loud on her birthday. And every single time, Marcus intended to make sure the answer was the same one Angela had promised all those years ago. Yes. Always yes. Not ever. Not for any reason otherwise. If this story moved you, you know exactly what to do. Subscribe, because stories like this one are only just getting started. And somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for their moment to be seen.